Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. Singapore Homebrew on Money FM 89.3.
Recently, the Health Science Authority here in Singapore approved a drug called Leqembi. It's a groundbreaking treatment for Alzheimer's disease that is clinically proven to slow the progression in early-stage patients. Now, the approval is especially timely as dementia currently affects over 92,000 people locally, and that number is projected to rise significantly in coming years with the silver wave washing up across Singapore. The multi-center trial involved the National University Hospital as the only study site in Southeast Asia. Joining us now, Professor Christopher Chen, visiting consultant at the Department of Psychological Medicine at the National University Hospital. Also, Dr. Memory, Aging and Cognition at the Center National University Health System. Certainly knows a lot about this topic. And also Associate Professor Adeline Ng, Senior Consultant of Neurology at the National Neuroscience Institute. So great to have both of you with us today in the studio to talk about an issue that is frankly not very comfortable for many of us to talk about. I shared with you my own mom suffered from dementia before she passed away several years ago. And first of all, Christopher, maybe kind of give us a broad look at what you were hoping to find with the study that you did. You did an original bit of research, and where are we at with the state of both Alzheimer's and dementia? What's the difference? Kind of give us a bit of an overview.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Firstly, thank you very much for sharing that your family has also been affected by dementia. And I'll straight off say that my family has too. My father had dementia, and this really gives me a lot more incentive to work very hard on this topic for my patients and their families. So dementia is a catch-all term to describe loss of memory and cognitive function sufficient to affect your daily activities. It's a bit like saying that I have chest pain or I have a cough, because that describes a bunch of symptoms. It could be caused by many things. So the most common cause of dementia is something called Alzheimer's disease, which we'll focus on today. But there are other conditions that can cause dementia, such as strokes, rarer conditions like frontotemporal dementia, which my colleague Dr. Ng is an expert on. And there's also dementia associated with other brain diseases such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, etc. But really today we're focusing on Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease was described, not surprisingly, by somebody called Alzheimer, but very surprisingly on a patient who we now know was called August Dieter. So
How long ago is this? What's our time frame?
A century ago.
Wow. Already that long ago.
That's right. And it's amazing that her initials were the same as what we call Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, there are many people who think that we shouldn't be naming diseases after doctors. We should be naming them after patients. So maybe we should call this August disease. It describes a certain form of damage to the brain, characterized by two proteins which Professor Alzheimer saw under a microscope, what we call amyloid plaques and tau tangles. So it's amyloid and tau. They seem to both be needed to produce the symptoms of dementia. Amyloid appears to be very important to start off the disease. But if you don't develop tau or brain degeneration, you may not have symptoms. So what's happened over the last century now is that we've gone from thinking that Alzheimer's disease is a cognitive disorder to now understanding that Alzheimer's disease is a brain disease, which only in the later stages expresses itself as cognitive problems.
And if I'm not mistaken, there's something called plaque that develops in the brain that that restricts the different synapses from happening that for memory and for other things, cognition. Is that correct?
That's right. So
you're trying to figure out where that plaque comes from and how we can minimize it.
Well, I wish we knew where plaques came from.
Yeah,
but
right.
it's and the use of the term plaque is useful because there's a good analogy to heart disease. Mm-hmm. So we develop atherosclerotic plaques in our blood vessels.
Right.
And when we first develop this, there are no symptoms. It's only very late on when the plaque ruptures or completely blocks off your blood vessel that you might have a heart attack or you might have a stroke.
Yeah.
So Alzheimer's disease is very much like that. The beginning of the disease may be completely asymptomatic. And there may be very early insidious symptoms before, the more commonly known symptoms appear. And therefore, our efforts have been to try and identify people at risk earlier and earlier and to treat earlier and earlier because it is, unfortunately, very difficult to reverse all the damage in late disease.
Let's get into this drug Leqembi and your study in just a moment. I do want to bring in Associate Professor Adeline Ng, Senior Consultant of Neurology at the National Neuroscience Institute. Adeline, what's the National Neuroscience Institute doing around this topic of dementia, of Alzheimer's? And from your perspective, where do you see this issue as it's affecting Singapore right now?
That's a very good question. So at the National Neuroscience Institute, because we are made up of neurologists, I think as neurologists, we do tend to see patients who are younger. So there's a spectrum of patients who present with dementia symptoms. Some of them are younger. They start from the age of 40s, 50s, 60s, and then you have those that present with dementia in the 70s and 80s. So we tend to get the ones who are younger. And therefore, a large part of what we do is evaluating their family history. We use more biomarkers. Biomarkers are essentially biological measures of what is causing the brain disease, as Professor Chen has mentioned. Sometimes, without doing special scans, you can also take fluids, such as fluid from the spine that we call cerebrospinal fluid, and we check for these amyloid proteins as well as tau proteins. And that's what we try to do at NNI so that we get a more biological definition of what is causing that dementia.
Interesting. Yeah. And are you aligned with Professor Chen in thinking that this is now a brain disease?
Oh, definitely. I think he's hit the nail on the head. We know that many persons, they can go through life with a bit of amyloid in the brain, but they may never develop dementia. So I think researchers such as Prof. Chen, ourselves, are trying to find out what it is that causes someone to then progress from someone having just amyloid in the brain to going on to developing tau and degeneration in the brain and subsequently dementia symptoms.
And when you're looking, you mentioned you do a lot of look at the family history. How important is the family history? If somebody has a father, a mother, a grandfather, a grandmother that has had dementia, will they get it?
I think that's a very important question.
We all want to know that. I want to know that.
We're asked that question, I think, in every single clinic. If my parent has dementia, do I have it? So I think firstly, we will find out that your parent have Alzheimer's. Sometimes the parent may have had something called vascular dementia, as Prof. Chen mentioned, due to strokes. So if the parent did get diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we usually say there are two different ways one could inherit that sort of risk of Alzheimer's. If the parent had Alzheimer's when they were young, in their 30s, early 40s, then we worry about a set of genes which are very rare. They have the children have a 50% chance of inheriting the condition, but they will develop symptoms very young age.
And
30s,
what
40s.
would you see as a symptom?
Well, the typical Alzheimer's symptoms, but in the young age they can have even motor symptoms. But these are extremely rare. There are only less than few percent of Alzheimer's cases around the world.
So then,
even in
if
Singapore.
they have those, then the children might have a 50% chance.
Yes, and then we come to the more common way someone might inherit a risk of Alzheimer's, which is a gene called ApoE gene, which many people might have heard of. All of us carry the ApoE gene. We may carry a copy called number 2. We call it E2, E3, or E4. E4 is the one that's the risk gene that we talk about. If you carry one copy of the E4 gene from one parent, you may have a 4 times higher risk of Alzheimer's than the general population. If you carry 2 copies, one from each parent, so you get an E4 from your mom, E4 from your dad, and you have 2 copies, your risk goes up to about 10 times higher. Having said that, it's a risk gene, meaning that if you carry 2 copies of E4, it doesn't mean you will get Alzheimer's. It just means your risk is higher.
It's so complicated.
Yeah. Which is why it's important.
Right? It should just be easier. Your parents had it, you're going to have it. Then you know what you're dealing with, right?
Well,
or vice versa.
Which is why it's important that we don't encourage patients to go out and just get themselves tested, because they may never develop Alzheimer's disease. It's just a risk gene.
Actually, Glenn, I'll put it another way.
Yeah.
If your parents live to a ripe old age but succumb to dementia because it's associated with aging, you might also have inherited the ability to live long.
Yeah.
So it's not such a bad
So it's
thing.
not all bad, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
And I remember this one phrase that one of my mom's doctors has said. We were talking about dementia. It's like, the old adage is it's not that in your older years you lose the keys to the car, because everybody loses things or forgets or whatever, but it's that you forget what the keys are for, right? And I don't know how true that holds in your interesting research, Professor Chen. But let's talk about Leqembi, because this is a groundbreaking treatment for Alzheimer's. The Health Sciences Authority has approved it. Your clinical studies have shown that it does slow the progression in early stage patients. So without getting too technical, what does this actually do for people?
Right.
And when do they need to start taking it?
Thank you very much, Glenn. So this has been the culmination of many, many years of research, many failures. The amyloid hypothesis for Alzheimer's disease, the idea that if amyloid is very important for the development of Alzheimer's disease and therefore treating it is pivotal, was proposed 20 years ago. And it's taken that long to show for the first time recently that it's actually true. And the problem was that I think we were too timid. In the beginning, people didn't really want to eliminate amyloid. They thought that just by lowering a little bit, it would work, and it didn't. And people were also intimidated by the possibility of side effects. So what has happened recently is that advances in our ability to diagnose Alzheimer's disease using the blood test that Adeline talked about, but more importantly, using specialized brain scans called amyloid PET scans, or using these lumbar punctures and CSF tests, allow us to definitively diagnose whether you have amyloid or not during life. And that was,
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, that is huge, because previous trials put people in who had symptoms but did not have amyloid.
And that was developed here in Singapore, that test?
No.
No, developed somewhere else. But you were testing it here.
Yeah, so these tests were developed. For example, amyloid PET was developed in Pittsburgh many years ago, but we brought this to Singapore about 10 years ago with the help of many people with the PET Center at NUS. And the blood tests, well, they were developed only in the last decade, but we have recently been able to show that they work just as well in Singaporeans, and even Singaporeans who have diverse ethnicities and concomitant stroke disease in their brain.
Is there a difference between ethnicity, between being from here, being from Europe, being from North America, or is the brain working the same way and the genetic makeup working the same way?
We have differences in our genetic makeup, but at the end of the day, these tests pick up amyloid, whether you're black, white, yellow, green, blue, whatever you are.
And if somebody does have this amyloid, is it a predictor? I mean, what percentage does that raise their chances of being affected by dementia, or can we not say that?
We can. Having amyloid, as Adeline said, some people who have amyloid don't develop any symptoms. But most people with amyloid will develop symptoms given time. It's a bit like cigarette smoking.
Yeah.
I mean, not that you would know about this, Glenn.
I'm a reformed smoker.
Okay.
Yeah.
But of course, there are people who smoke and never develop any disease.
Correct.
But
you hear these. If someone died at 100 years old, they smoked all of their life, and it wasn't death from cigarettes.
The evidence is that smoking is bad for you.
Yeah.
That's why banning smoking has made such a difference. So amyloid is not good for you.
Yeah. Okay, Leqembi.
Yes.
So you did this great study, and now you've got this drug. Because we don't have a lot of time left, but how do we move into deploying this treatment? 92,000 people potentially suffering in Singapore. The number is going to go up. What does the use of this drug now look like going forward?
Okay. Well, thanks for asking. Firstly, Leqembi is a fantastic drug at eliminating amyloid. It virtually reduces the amount of amyloid in your brain to zero.
Wow.
But it's not a cure.
Okay.
It doesn't stop the disease in its tracks because other things are happening.
So it's one element of
Yes.
the disease.
So what it does is that, at least for Leqembi, it reduces your risk of progressing to a more severe form of dementia. In other words, you can stop you from going from mild cognitive impairment to mild dementia, or from mild dementia to moderate dementia by a third. It buys you time.
For a lot of people, that's going to be a huge
Exactly.
benefit.
So I think that's the most important thing. Doctors can talk about all these scales that we use and etc. But the most important thing is what it means to the patient and their families.
How early do you have to start taking it?
So the drug has been shown to be effective in people with what we call mild cognitive impairment. That is, people who have memory symptoms and objective abnormalities on their memory, but haven't yet lost the ability to look after themselves. And it also seems to be effective in people who have memory problems but have only mild difficulties in looking after themselves. So the early stages. It doesn't. It
will just sort of minimize future development.
Correct.
Future impairment.
So we don't know whether it has any effect in people with more severe forms of dementia, but it seems less likely.
Yeah,
so
it can't bring them back to normality.
No, it doesn't reverse the clock. It just slows things down.
Got it.
And I think it's very important to emphasize, therefore, that we are not saying that this drug's for everybody, all the 92,000 people with dementia.
Yeah.
Furthermore, in order to achieve safety, there are restrictions. So people with a lot of strokes in their brain, they don't qualify. People with, say, the double ApoE4 genotype, they're at higher risk of side effects. So, they may not qualify, etc. I think the most important deterrent right now is, I'm afraid, this terrible thing that Singaporeans are always obsessed about, cost.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's not subsidized by MOH at the moment. I think they are considering whether to do so.
And it's expensive?
I'm afraid it is. Not just the cost of the drug, but also the cost of diagnosis and the cost of monitoring for safety. So you will need either a CSF lumbar puncture or a PET scan to diagnose the disease for sure. Okay, because the blood test is a good screener, but is not right at this moment in time a diagnostic test.
And all that is available in Singapore?
Yes, it is.
At a price?
At a cost.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then once the person takes the drug, they're on it forever?
No. They're on it for at least 18 months.
Okay. Daily?
No, every 2 weeks for
Every
the
2
Leqembi.
weeks? Okay.
But I think it's fair to say that there are other drugs. There is another approved drug where you're only given once a month.
Okay.
But those trials weren't done in Singapore. Not a lot of Asian trials either. So we are fortunate that in the major Leqembi trial, 17% of the patients were Asian. So we were able to do an Asian subgroup analysis, which actually showed that the efficacy of the drug was similar in Asians compared to non-Asians, but the side effect rate appeared to be lower.
Wow.
Half what we found elsewhere.
Wow.
And that is now shown in real life because we have reports from our colleagues in Japan and in Korea saying that the side effects which many people have read about, brain swelling or brain hemorrhage, are not common in Asians and are very manageable.
Interesting. Adeline, we're just about out of time. I'm going to give the last sort of thoughts to you. Leqembi, what does that mean for you at the National Neuroscience Institute?
I think it's a very sort of, if you may call it, game-changing sort of treatment we have for our younger patients. I've had two sort of patients in their 50s who started the drug Leqembi. One of them carries 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. And after 18 months of treatment with Leqembi, she's not developed a single bleed or any side effects from the drug as Prof.
Yeah.
Chen mentioned.
18 months already.
Yeah, I mean, she started it way before it was approved.
And her dementia symptoms have stayed
so as
consistent?
Prof. Chen was saying, we don't expect them to go back to normal, but what has been very clear from her family is that her daily function in terms of how engaged she is with her family, doing things that she likes to do, going traveling, that has certainly prolonged that period that she was able to do that and sort of engage meaningfully with her family.
I think people will take that, all day long. They'll take the progression of stopping.
And then that's such an important point to make, Glenn. I mean, if you reflect back for your own family, what would you have taken on in terms of cost and trouble to keep your mother going, to ensure that she recognized your son, to see her grandson graduate? I mean, those things are very difficult costs.
Yeah. Wow. Is just one last quick question. Is AI playing any artificial intelligence playing any role in the search for dementia or Alzheimer's pathways forward? Adeline, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of scientists and researchers who use AI and machine learning tools to try and discover new pathways and new targets. Also looking at drug libraries, trying to screen using existing drugs, new drugs for new therapy. So that's definitely on the cards. Yes.
Great. I want to thank both of you very much for coming in today. We hope actually to have you again, and as we get more information and as you're seeing how this is really working in the general population.
We should bring some patients in.
I would love that. Love that as well. Professor Christopher Chen, visiting consultant, the Department of Psychological Medicine at the National University of Hospital, and Associate Professor Adeline Ng, Senior Consultant, Neurology at the National Neuroscience Institute. Thank you for being with us today to talk about this amazing drug, Leqembi.
Thank you very much.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.